Okay, remind everybody once again to mute. Welcome everyone to the October Zoominar. I'm here in Carroll for the Iowa Leadership Exchange. It should be an exciting one today. This will be recorded, as Bill indicated. A few things to remind everyone of. On December 14th, there is the Combined Empower Rural Iowa and the Iowa Rural Development Council meeting in Nevada. This will be really an exciting meeting in a great location, so be sure to mark that on your calendars. Also, keep reminding everybody the Iowa Rural Summit will be April 11th to the 12th at the Gateway Center in Ames. This will be preceded by ISU's Extension and Outreach Rural Housing and IDA Grant Program Workshop on December 10th at the Gateway Center. So make sure you come to both. It'll be an exciting time. My name is Mark Reinig. I'm president of the Iowa Rural Development Council, and I also work for ISU Extension and Outreach in Communities and Economic Development. And this morning, I'm excited to introduce Dr. John Lawrence, the Vice President of Extension and Outreach at ISU. John leads over 1,200 faculty and staff who support what Iowa values, which is a strong rural Iowa. John is from Southwest Iowa. He's a professor of economics and has been in many roles since 1991. And most importantly, he has been a very strong and long-time supporter of the IRDC. John will be retiring in 2023, so today we're going to hear John's thoughts on what has happened over the past 31 years, what is happening now, and what might be happening in the future for rural Iowa. So with that, we will have questions. You can put those in the chat, and we will have time at the end of the program for questions. So go ahead, John. Thank you.
Well, Mark, thank you. And thanks to Bill for inviting me to share some thoughts on this. It's, as he said, I'm planning to retire. I started in July 1 of 1991. So 31 years in Iowa State, and the state of Iowa has been very good to me. I'm going to share with you some thoughts about extension and outreach, but more importantly, I think some of the facts, some of the things that we are doing now that are important, I believe, to rural Iowa, but Iowa more generally. I'm going to go back a little bit further than 31 years at the very beginning here, but focus a lot about what's going on today and then share some thoughts about where this goes into the future. One of the key things, before I forget, is they just yesterday announced the dates for the interviews of the next vice president for extension and outreach. We'll start here the next week. The 27th, I believe, is the first candidate coming in. There's going to be 5 candidates coming to campus, and we'll wrap up before Thanksgiving, I think by November 18th. Maybe it's when we get the last one in. There will be, largely internal discussions, and there will be a statewide webinar for the members of Iowa State that have an iastate.edu address. But all of those recorded seminars will be available after the final candidate interviews. We don't want to give somebody an advantage of being able to watch their competitors' seminars ahead of time. So and there'll also be an opportunity for people to weigh in, to provide input. And I know Bill has been part of the interview. He's on the search committee. So as you have thoughts about these people, be sure and relay that on to Bill so he can take that message to the full committee. So with that, let's get started. And I want to start with a land acknowledgement statement Well, let me start first by sharing my screen. So I screwed up already here. All right, now let's try this. There we go. All right. I want to start with the land acknowledgement statement. And this is a statement that Iowa State adopted in 2020, but it just recognizes that the land our university sits on once belonged to the Bakodes tribe, or the Iowa Nation. And it was obtained from the Meskwaki and Sauk nations in a treaty of 1842. And we recognize our obligations to care for these resources today as they did prior to 1842, and recognize there are over 17,000 Native people in Iowa today. And this land acknowledgement statement is important as we talk about land grant universities. Iowa State is a land grant university, and that's a literal term. The nation in 1862, when Abraham Lincoln signed the Morrill Act, gave land to states to either rent or sell to fund a public institution. And that was a noble and novel experiment. Prior to that, we'd follow the European model of an aristocratic society where you had to be wealthy to attend college. The Land Grant Act provided public lands for a public education. At that time, the federal government had land. They didn't have a lot of money, but they had a lot of land. And so they gave land to states. They gave 30,000 acres per representative. So at the time, Iowa had 6 congressmen and 2 senators. And so we got about 240,000 acres. Part of that was disputed between what was given to a railroad. So we ended up with about 200,000 acres, and we've gone back and identified those parcels, and you can see them identified on the map. You can go to this website. It's an interactive map. You can click on the parcel of land. If you're from that area, your family may own some land that was once given to the state of Iowa to support the university. What's interesting is that 25 other states received land in Iowa to fund their land grant. And if you think about it, all the land east of Iowa at that time was pretty much in private hands. And so this is where there was still federal land that could be given out. But back to our land acknowledgement statement, while we think the land grant universities have done great things for society, it came at a cost to the indigenous people. And while we can't change history, we can at least acknowledge it. Well, Iowa State University was the first state in the nation to accept the terms of the Morrill Act, and therefore we like to think of ourselves as the first land grant university. And that, as I said, was to educate the sons and daughters of farmers and mechanics. Along came the Hatch Act, was to do research to better agriculture, and the Smith-Lever Act was really about extension and outreach. But Iowa actually started extension and outreach prior to the federal government. In fact, in 1903, we sent a professor on a train up to Northwest Iowa, not us pushing knowledge out, but the people of Northwest Iowa said, we understand you're doing research on seed corn development. Why don't you come and bring that knowledge to us? And that was really the start of the extension concept nationally. Well, that was 1903. By 1903. By 1905, we were sending entire train loads of faculty out to rural communities. The first one was in Red Oak, Iowa, in Southwest Iowa. But we would send them out for a week-long short course. And we would have faculty that would cover agriculture and home economics and community development and boys and girls clubs, which later became 4-H. And those are the same 4 areas that we work in today. And by the time the federal government signed the Smith-Lever Act to establish a national cooperative extension service, Iowa had done over 170 of those week-long short courses of taking the knowledge of the university out into the state. So we have a long history of that. I'd say that's our most recent pledge class, but that's probably not quite true. But these are some of the early founders of Extension and real pioneers that got us started. But today, as was mentioned in the introduction, we really focus on building a strong Iowa. And our lanes that we operate in, we really see 4 lanes, is around feeding people, keeping them healthy, helping communities prosper and thrive, and turning the world over to the next generation in a better shape than we found it. We do that through our agricultural and natural resources program around food and the environment. Our human sciences works on health and nutrition and family finance and mental health, community economic development. Folks, you're familiar with those, and we'll go into more detail on some of their programming yet this morning. And then our 4-H and youth program, that both our traditional clubs program that you might think about as the county fair and the leading the calf into the ring, but about 2/3 of the kids we reach are through after-school programs, in-school day camps, and so on. And we reach in total between 90 and 1,000 and 100,000 youth a year through our youth programs. An example of kind of how we do this, or where we do it, I should say, we have a new data reporting system, so we're better able to track some of this. But in the last year, we've had over 7,500 different educational events. These pie charts represent the zip code, the town, if you will, where the event was held. And the colors reflect the topic, whether it was green is youth 4-H, the kind of blue-green is agriculture, the pink is community development, economic development, and the kind of orange is human sciences. But as we say, we're throughout the state. We talk about being the 99 county campus of Iowa State University. And this big one here in the middle is Story County. There's a lot of activity, events here, obviously, often statewide events that occur in Story County. And in the last year, we reached over 750,000 people, or contacts, I should say. This may be the same people we met with 2 or 3 or more times, but we reported 774,000 contacts. Again, 4-H is a big part of that, but agriculture, human sciences, community development has a rather small sliver as far as the number of people. But as you think of the depth and the type of programming, it has a much bigger multiplier effect as we, the community economic development, work with economic developers such as yourselves or community leaders that are impacting hundreds, if not thousands of people in that community. Another piece of that, there in the bold text, is we reached over 42,000 individuals. So we've gone through and scanned for duplicates. And this is just those that received a certificate of some kind. We had lots and lots of other people we had contact with and assisted and educated that was an informal education. But of these that went through enough training to receive some type of a certificate. An example of that is childcare. We train somewhere or provide training to 20,000 or more childcare providers a year, and they might receive 60,000 certificates because there's different categories of childcare. Or food safety. Our restaurants are required by law to have at least one individual trained in food safety. We provide a lot of that training. And there are other examples. Municipal clerks, the training that those people go through, that work in the cities and counties and communities. A lot of those are examples of that. As we think about what makes Extension unique, we talk about being research-based or evidence-based education and information. There's lots of sources of information out there. The internet has just exploded. Anybody can write a blog. There's Wikipedia. There's companies in the education or information business. We like to think what makes us unique is that we're not trying to sell something, and in most cases, we're not selling you the information either. It's public service. It needs to be a public good that's provided, but it's also research-based or evidence-based, so there's something standing behind it. We're embedded in the communities for the long run. As I mentioned at the beginning, we've been in for over 100 years. We've had county offices in every county of the state. Unlike grant programs that might be there for the 3 years that the grant is going on, it ends and that program ends and those people leave, we're still there. And we're in the community. And whether that's a physical community, like a town in a county, or it's a community of professionals, we're part of that. I see Gary Taylor is in the meeting here with this group. Mark Renning is serving as the president of this organization. We're embedded in these communities. We also have I'd say a local to global perspective. While we're embedded in the community and living on Main Street, because of our research network at the university, we're often looking over the horizon at the next big thing, whether that's a new technology, it's a policy change, either here at the federal or maybe an international level, that's going to impact Iowa or impact individual communities. And it's really that comprehensive view of what impacts Iowa that I think makes us somewhat unique. We're not just a sliver of it as it relates to one company or one technology. We're also really focus on building capacity of people, of organizations, and of communities. We do that with our own staff. We have a lot of continuing education, but what we're doing is educating people to make better decisions for themselves, to be able to evaluate information that they do find on the internet or they do hear from other people. They can step back and better analyze that and make decisions. We help build capacity of organizations by providing training for their staff or members, or providing data to them. As you think of the data for decision makers and communities and organizations looking at that information. And we rely heavily on partnerships and relationships to get our work done. And again, this organization is a good example of that as we partner with them. We partner with schools, we partner with fair boards. We work closely with the different agencies, whether that's Iowa Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship, or the Department of Natural Resources, or a Department of Human Services, or IEDA. We partner with these different groups because we're working in most cases with many of the same audiences. Let me give you an example recently of some of the work Extension has done. And we, of course, COVID impacted us all. But if you remember, in March of 2020, here on campus, we sent kids home for spring break and said, don't come back. A lot of K-12 closed during that time period. Businesses were shutting down. And a lot of the focus was on the shutdown. And by early April, we had a committee standing up saying, Iowa is going to have to recover at some time. What will it take to help Iowans recover from COVID? We didn't know how long the pandemic was going to last. We didn't know all of the impacts, but we knew that there would be a recovery. And so we started looking ahead, focusing on those areas where we saw a need, but that were also in our lane. So helping revive the Iowa economy, including the farm economy, supporting Iowans and improving their own financial security. As you think about the people who were, reduced hours at work or were laid off because of the shutdown. Engaging Iowans in improving the food supply, food safety, food access, or just basic food security. And think about that time with all the supply chain disruptions. Expanding educational opportunities for youth. That summer slump we talk about with kids that started in March And even when we got back to school in August, some days they were in school, some days they weren't. Helping Iowans address mental health, and then supporting efforts to increase access to quality childcare. So let's just look at a couple of examples. Reviving the Iowa economy, I think a great example of partnership is we worked with SBDC and got photo boxes out to every county office where retailers could come in if they were now needing to put things online. A key part of advertising or putting products online is having a great professional looking picture. These photo boxes had a white background, well lit, and instructions on how to do that. And we partnered with SBDC and got those boxes delivered everywhere. Jasper County had a farm crawl in 2021 as we were coming out of the pandemic, but basically had a reason for the community to get out and visit farms, and whether that was local foods or meats or a petting zoo or handcrafts, it helped get people in the community and generate some business. I don't know what the final status of it was, but one of my favorite ones was Ringgold County. The county office there partnered with the local economic development office to update their business directory. Ringgold County, they told me that they hadn't updated their business directory in over 15 years. It was still printed in hard copy. And since that time, the number of people who'd given up landlines and gone to cell phones or now had a web page, didn't have one before, and there just wasn't a good directory. And they, between our extension and the economic development office, went door to door with businesses and taking referrals of who does your welding for you, and who, hey, have you talked to this new business we knew had opened up, and pulled all that into a digital business directory. We did story walks in downtown areas. And you say, well, what's a story walk? This is really focused on youth, but it's the idea of taking a book, and my wife, who loves books, hates when I tell this story, and you tear pages out of it, but you put a different page in every store or a different page at every stop, and families with their kids come along and read this page, and they go to the next spot and read the next page. And we had counties that did this in several of the downtowns that brought people, families, parents into stores. And as we talked to the retailers afterwards, they said a third of those people they had never seen before. And now they had met them, they were able to build a relationship. Some cases they bought things on site, and other cases they came back later. But it was a way to kind of revive the economy as things were beginning to open up. And a continuation of this, and this is a new one that Lisa Bates had just shared, is we're rolling out a social media for retailers program to educate retailers about how to use social media, particularly at the community level, to promote each other's businesses, and not only for people in that community, but that have friends of friends that are followers in social media to promote their own store, their own trade in goods, but that of the people in their community as well. As we think about improving financial security, we had, certainly it's something Extension has always done, but there's an increased emphasis of helping individuals and families learn how to prioritize bills to pay, manage their debt, and protect their credit. But also the VITA program, volunteer income tax assistance. This is where volunteers that are comfortable filling out the income tax forms, work with people that come in and want some assistance. We had one county that organized, and they did this drive-through curbside during COVID. They had 630 returns, and it returned over $1 million of IRS tax returns to those 600 people in that community. That's a lot of dollars coming back into a community. Supporting, food security or improving food security. We had lots of examples. We've got one we call Growing Together Iowa, where it's our master gardeners. But instead of, the flowers around the library, which is great, and they still do that, they focused actually on food production. And I think we've got something like 37 counties where master gardeners are growing food for the local food pantries. This one is in Benton County, and in the town of Benton, and they're kind of that program on steroids. There was an existing CSA that was actually built on an old elementary school that had been raised and had turned back into a garden, but the people that were running it as the CSA said it just got more than they could handle. They donated it to the city. Well, Extension stepped in to help as the coordination, and it's run by volunteers. And so they've got 4-H'ers and FFA and master gardeners and retired people in the community. They're even working with the court systems. If there's juveniles that need to do community service, they can do it in the garden. But they are serving 11 food pantries in their counties. And for example, in 2021, they had over 12,000 pounds of produce. And they had, so far in 2022, earlier this summer, they were at 12,000 pounds and still harvesting. So a lot going on. The educational opportunities, we had a Read Across America where there's 1,000 educators were sent STEM literacy kits to engage with students. And we even kind of went back to the old one-room schoolhouse method where we had 4-H'ers, older 4-H'ers that started tutoring younger kids that were struggling with math and reading because of all the schools they had missed. So maybe that's 6th graders helping 2nd graders, or that's 8th graders helping 5th graders, but it really locally help those kids recover from that long summer slump. Of course, mental health is an area we've long worked in. The Iowa Concern Hotline started in 1985 during the farm crisis. That still continues today. But as an example of capacity building, we're now able to certify individuals in mental health first aid, and we've done over 500 of those last year. And then the Question, Persuade, Refer, QPR, is a suicide prevention model, and we've trained over 400 individuals in that. Many of these are agribusiness professionals, your co-op agronomist, the veterinarian, the banker that sees those farmers oftentimes, at their worst, but can really help ask, how much are you struggling? Can I get you some help? And we've partnered with the Iowa Department of Ag and Land Stewardship on a nationally funded program around reducing the stigma around mental health. So maybe more people will ask for help when they need it. Childcare, I mentioned that we train over 20,000 early childcare professionals each year. But one example, and this is where community economic development partnered with our human sciences folks, was to help Henry County establish a new child care center in Mount Pleasant. And there's 2 or 3 other examples around the state where our folks, helped the local leaders, or in some cases, really were the catalyst to get people around the table to take on this problem. Now, these are ones that you may be more familiar with. This is how Community Economic Development Program within Extension and Outreach addresses critical issues. And I stole these from Lisa Bates. So if Lisa's on, I thank you, and I apologize if I screw it up. But really, they focus on programs to build capacity, as we talked about that, the products, whether publications, the indicator portals, software, tools to help professionals do their work, processes, helping with public engagement tools that foster collaboration, and projects to address client identified needs and opportunities. You'll probably recognize some of these. Community and business development, there's the Iowa Retail Initiative, the Community Visiting Project, customer service workshops, and of course, collaborating with small business development centers. In civic engagement and equity, we've got the Leading Communities program, a leadership development program, the goal setting and strategic planning facilitation for communities. And an area that we really have putting resources into, doing a lot of work within our own organization, but also making that available to others, is around intercultural development inventory, helping communities determine how culturally sensitive or prepared are they? As you think about it, we're over 25% of the K-12 youth are kids of color. And so they're part of our communities today, some communities much more than others. How prepared are we for a community, and what actions can we take to make those new Iowans feel more welcome and be a part of that community? Within the data and technology side, the Iowa Governmental Finance Initiative annual reports to help the communities better understand their community finance, short course on using GIS, and the indicator portals. This data for decision makers, a really neat tool, and a lot of just publicly available information all in one place and pulled together. So it does help communities as they better understand what is happening. And it shows it over time as well. What are the trends in your communities, whether it's around demographics or income or housing or labor and all of these key factors. Local governments and housing. So grant writing 101, there's now a grant writing 201 for those who are more experienced. The Municipal Leadership Academy and the Professionals Institute and Academy, planning and zoning workshops, and rural housing readiness. That's really, as you all know, housing is a critical issue in the state of Iowa. And this is really helping communities dig in and understand what their housing challenges are and prepare them to move forward with action and based on research from their own community. Community food systems, this is a partnership between CED and our Ag and Natural Resources, but really around our community food systems. We have certification programs as you think about farmers market coordinators and managers, to give them the skill set they need. We work a lot in the farm to school and farm to institution, like hospitals program. There's currently in the state of Iowa, I think $4 million new dollars available for these farm to school programs. And so our folks can help local communities better understand, is the school prepared to work with this, and are the farmers to have what they need to be able to enter in this program. But it can help really stimulate the local food systems. Okay, so let's shift gears and look ahead a little bit. One of the things that we do on an ongoing basis is needs assessment. As I said, we're embedded in the communities. We should be, and I think we are, listening all the time. What are the issues out there? But periodically, we take a step back and take a broader look at things. And so one of the things that is going on now is this needs assessment, statewide needs assessment, where are asking not only the people that we work with on a day-to-day basis, but also we contracted with Qualtrics to do a random sample of 1,100 Iowans across our state, represent the demographics of our state, to better understand not only what issues they see as important and what issues within our wheelhouse they might have an interest in, but also how do they want to receive that information. We've been historically a face-to-face type organization, and we have always had, since going back to the ICN, the Iowa Communications Network, have always done some distance education. But of course, during COVID, we pivoted and almost entirely online in some cases. Well, now we're coming back, and what does that mix look like? How do people want to receive it? What's their preferred platform? And so that's a part of that. And I encourage you, if you haven't filled out this survey, I encourage you to do that. And please help spread that throughout your community so we hear from more Iowans. So finally, just to wrap things up, we'll talk about kind of my view of things. I think we're a trusted source of timely and relevant research-based information and education. We solve problems, we identify opportunities, and we build capacity. And we are a people-centered organization that succeeds through respectful relationships, not only internally here with our colleagues, but also with partners and stakeholders. And I think that's really is what sets us apart from certainly the private sector in many cases. And we're going to be here. We've been here for over 100 years. We're going to continue to be here well into the future. And so with that, I'll wrap things up. We have this virtual suggestion box for anytime anybody, the general public, as well as our own staff, can pop in there and leave us ideas. But with that, I think I'm going to stop sharing and probably about time for questions. So Mark, Bill, I'll turn it back to you.
All right, we have time for questions. Unmute and ask away. I think it's pretty wide open. Anything you want to quiz John on about what's going on now or the future?
I would just like to throw a comment out, if I may. Extension and SBDC have worked together for many years, and I have to say, through COVID, we had an opportunity to really dig into each other's organizations and work together even more. So, John, I just want to thank you for that, because a lot of it was due to your leadership and being willing to say yes. So I just wanted to tell you thank you. We sure appreciate it.
Oh, thank you, Lisa. No, I would agree. It's been a long-standing partnership, but I think it really ramped up and has continued on as we've moved back and moved beyond the pandemic.
Hey, John, I wanted to go back to the very beginning of your presentation. What a remarkable moment that was in 1862, in the middle of the Civil War, for Abraham Lincoln to make this incredible decision. He didn't just create the land grants, he created USDA. He opened westward migration through the Homestead Act. And all this was going on while he was running back and forth to battlefields. So I think sometimes we forget about the impact of that moment in 1862 and the impact that it's had for a century and a half plus.
Yeah, it was a remarkable time. And, the Railroad Act was the other thing. Is I often tell people that if we were going to try to recreate a railroad system or a university system today, we would just print money. And of course, they didn't at the time. The currency they had was land, because Louisiana Purchase, they had all the land west of the Mississippi. And so they gave land to railroads, they gave land to homesteaders, they gave land to states to create these universities. And so the other thing, it happened during the Civil War because the southern states were not there to block it, because there had been efforts to establish land grant universities prior to that and had been voted down. So.
John, I have a question. What would you see as the #1 issue going forward that's going to be facing ISU as a whole and serving Iowans here in the immediate future and maybe 10 years out?
Yeah. Well, in the immediate future, I think it's inflation and rising rising cost of living, rising wages. We're trying to stay competitive to keep or hire great people, but we're dealing off with a flat budget, right? My extension budget has been flat since 2014, except for a small cut in 2020 during the pandemic. The last 2 years, we've had a bit of one-time money because of a national conference coming up. And I'm not talking inflation adjusted, I'm talking nominal. Federal budgets have been very flat as well. And so over the past 10 years, when inflation was fairly low and we raises were a 0 one year and maybe a 2% the next, we could kind of keep up. But now that we've had 2 years of 3% raises back to back or more, and probably more of those coming in the future, it's going to be a struggle, just as it is for families and businesses and communities everywhere. But because of, and this is more relevant when I say this, since I'm retiring, when you're on a fixed income, like a state agency, it's a real challenge. The broader, and beyond that, I think what are the challenges or opportunities, I think is making the adjustment to that. What does the new normal look like? Just as everyone, do we have the right footprint for the next decade or the next 100 years, just because we had it the previous 100 years? Digitally, are we well positioned, and what does a digital relationships look like? What, those types of things. And do we have expertise in the right places to serve Iowa over the next decade? And again, just because we have for the last 2 or 3 decades, we have this set of professionals in working in these particular areas, are those the areas we need going forward? And those will be challenges. I think a bigger challenge, and I'll go back to kind of Bill's statement of about 160 years ago, there were some great things. It was a public money to a public institution because public good is created. And of course, across many states, and Iowa included, we're now looking, society seems to be now looking at education as more of a private good rather than a public good. I think it's probably been over the last 30 years now, but used to be 80% of Iowa State's budget come from state or federal, and now it's about 20. And in the undergraduate world, tuition makes up that difference. What do we do in the extension world, or what do we do in the research world where we can't charge, we can't charge as much tuition? We've done some of that. We charge for fees and services that we didn't used to, but it's those are kind of at the fringe and help support particular programs. They don't carry the full load. So that's going to be some of the more difficult choices.
We have a question in the chat, and I'll read it here, and then you can respond to it. It has to do with incorporating culturally and linguistically appropriate infrastructures for non-native English-speaking communities, refugees, and immigrants. As Iowa's demographics continue to change, refugees and immigrants have been vital to the state's economic growth. From your perspective, what can we do to ensure equitable access for all Iowans to programs and resources, and how do we do that?
Yeah, great.
On a global perspective.
Yeah, great question. And I can speak to that, what we're doing within extension, but then extend that about, all right, how as the state of Iowa. And as a federally funded organization, we have a mandate that we must serve all Iowans. And so we continue on that journey to how we do that better. Just recently, in the last few months, we've established a contract with a company called Accorby that is a translation and interpretation service. The university had a standing contract with them. We've extended that over into extension. We have what they call the I Speak cards that USDA has. We have those in every office, and it's a whole set of languages in their written language. It says I speak, Lebanese, or I speak Spanish, or I speak French. And people can, when someone comes in, they can point to that. And then we can call this Accorby number and get a translator on the phone and have a discussion. If we're having an educational meeting and we know because of pre-registration that somebody there's going to be Spanish speakers in the room, we can arrange to have translators to present at that program. We have other programs that are tailored specifically to, say, Spanish speakers. The Salir Aladente, which is about college preparation for parents as well as the youth. around what classes to take and that sort of thing, but also how to start saving for it, what grants are available, those types of things. So we do some things in other languages. We have now a translation and interpretation service available as well, and we're training up our staff on how to do that. More broadly, as I mentioned, the IDI, the intercultural program that is something that we can help communities do an assessment of. We also have navigating differences around cultural competencies that we can do for companies or communities. There's a second kind of the follow-on to that is coming together around racial understanding. We're doing all of that for our staff, but again, for communities, for companies, for agencies like United Way or whatever, we've done those kinds of training to help Iowans be better prepared to deal with different cultures.
We have another question. Could you also tell us a bit about what you do for municipal county governments, for elected officials and clerks, the onboarding and training for strategic planning, et cetera? We used to have the Institute of Public Affairs at the U of I, and I think you're doing some of that now. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
So if I could call on Gary Taylor or to fill that in, he would know more specifically. So Gary?
Sure. Hi, Lucy. We met last week. Hope you're doing well. We have had what used to be called the Municipal Clerks Institute, which is now the Municipal Professionals Institute. We've run that for over 50 years now. We bring anywhere from 150 to 200 clerks to campus. At some point during the year, we've changed it somewhat to a hybrid program, so they're not here as long, but there's also a more extensive series of virtual programming. We partner with the Iowa League of Cities to do the Municipal Leadership Academy. We present several of the sessions and help them in organizing the MLA in the spring after local elections. So there's two examples. Yeah, Jeff Schott used to, when there was a U of I Institute for Public Affairs, Jeff Schott did strategic planning and goal setting for city councils. We have taken over much of that. It can be, we tailor it to whatever the council wants, whether it's a half a day of goal setting, whether it's a day of strategic planning. All of our community and economic development specialists have been trained in a specific method of doing strategic planning and public participation. And so we're actually doing quite a few of those around the state now. We do planning and zoning workshops for planning and zoning commissions, boards of adjustment, elected officials, and a surprising number of zoning administrators. We have a series of regional workshops every spring. We also do those individually for communities on request. A lot of other things. John mentioned RHRA, the Rural Housing Readiness Assessment. I think most of the folks on this call are familiar with that because the governor's office supports it. IEDA supports it through a grant program. We seem to talk about it every time we get together as IRDC. John also mentioned our Iowa Government Finance Initiative data and reports. So we work in data, we work in strategic planning, we do more traditional workshops. We also do special projects for hire for municipalities if they're looking at, if they want to deal with a specific issue. I can't even begin to describe the variety of projects that we've done over the past 20 years. So That's a 2-minute snapshot of, actually, that was probably more than 2. It was about 5-minute snapshot that, glad to talk to you anytime.
Thank you. Do the communities pay for that, or it's free as part of the extension services?
It depends on what you're talking about. A lot of it has, for reasons John just alluded to, has moved to fee for service over the last few years. Helps us balance the budget within CED. If we can charge a registration fee or a fee for service for doing strategic planning or things like that.
Thank you.
You bet.
Great. We have 2 more things from the chat. Drew Emerson has put on a link to a refugee summit on Thursday, November 10th for welcoming new Iowans. And then we have a question: what are the top 2 strategic partnerships for ISU extension and outreach that you believe would contribute the most to the long-term success of extension services in Iowa?
Yeah, great question. And I'll dodge that a little bit by saying it depends. I think if we were looking at our youth programming, it probably would be with schools. It'd be one of the key things. How do we work more closely with schools if we're trying to reach all youth in the state of Iowa? As you think about with communities, I think that organizations like this is a key partnership that is already representing a lot of the same people we want to reach, and rather than trying to compete, and whether that is for attention or for dates of meetings, like the housing conference is set in conjunction with your conference, and those types of partnerships and just knowing one another are absolutely essential. I think if you look at other places, I think one that we have kind of a on again, off again relationship with is community colleges. They are set obviously throughout the state. They are publicly supported. SBDCs are sometimes embedded in those. They provide continuing education in some fields, but there's other places that we match up. So how do we partner more closely with them going forward also?
Are there any other questions? I'm not seeing it. I have one last question for you, John. What are your immediate plans after March of 2023? I don't see you just fading into the limelight here.
Yeah, I imagine I'll still be involved in some projects. On the personal side, I've got a motorcycle that needs to have a lot more miles put on it. It feels neglected, and so that's one. And then my wife and I have a farm in southwest Iowa that we bought a shed on there that we're converting into a cabin. So got the solar power hooked up last weekend, so I have electricity. My wife said John's created electricity at least within our cabin. So that'll keep me busy for a while.
Great. I would like to thank you very much, John. I'm always amazed as you start ticking off all the different programming, the wealth of knowledge that you have and are able to throw out. That I'm impressed. The slide deck is available. Bill will make that available for anybody to view. And I'd like to thank all of you for taking time out of your morning this morning. And thanks again. And we'll be having another Zoominar in December, but we don't have that topic down yet, right? Correct, Bill?
That is correct. We're working on that one. We're always eager to hear your ideas too.
And remember, December 14th is the Empower Rural Iowa and Iowa Rural Development Council meeting jointly in Nevada. So thanks again, everyone.
Yep. Bye now.
Bye.